Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and we've got an exciting episode today as FSD Beta version 11.3.1 has finally started to roll out to non-employee Tesla customers. We've also got a couple updates on China, a recall or investigation from NHTSA, and more. Looking at the stock, Tesla today not as exciting, down 3%, closing at $182 even, while the Nasdaq was up 0.4% on the day. Fed Chairman Powell's comments did continue today to the Senate. So he was a little bit more, dovish today, just saying that no decision has been made yet in regards to the March meeting. Obviously, a lot of the perception yesterday was that we may be heading towards a 50 basis point increase for that meeting. Nevertheless, with those, comments about waiting until some of the March or February data in March comes in, the expectations for a 50 basis point increase have continued to rise today versus what we had talked about yesterday from CME Group's FedWatch tool here. About 81% versus, 71% yesterday for that 50 basis point raise. So we'll see on that. A lot of economic data to come in next week, followed by the FOMC meeting the week after. As for Tesla, Tesla did receive a downgrade today from Berenberg. They downgraded to hold from buy. Basically, just the stock has reacted from their buy rating, and they feel that some of the misplaced fears about a price war occurring in the automotive industry or in the EV market have been accepted by the market at this point, or recognized by the market at this point as not as likely. Nevertheless, they did talk about a little bit of their expectations longer term, and for the next generation vehicle, they are modeling a very slow rollout here. They say that they don't expect that next generation vehicle delivery run rate to reach 1 million vehicles until 2028. So obviously we kind of hope to see that in 2024, 2025 launch, and then that would be a pretty lengthy rollout for, what we've seen Tesla accomplish in the past, but that's kind of what they are expecting with their hold rating. Also on Tesla, we did have a couple more Form 4s filed today. We got one from Zach and one from Drew. Then this is pretty standard, typical business practice that we see from them every so often, so nothing major to report on those, but just wanted to mention those in case anyone had seen the Form 4s and maybe thought more Elon selling. All right, getting into FSD Beta version 11.3.1, the release notes here that we have talked about with 11.3, they have actually changed a decent amount. So if we look at a sort of a difference checker here, here's 11.3 on the left, 11.3.1 on the right. There's a lot of differences here, but it seemed like they sort of built on each other. So we've gone through a lot of the progress from 11.3. I don't want to go point by point here for 11.3.1, but just highlighting a couple things that people will probably notice. Not that these are the most important things, but obviously the big step for FSD Beta version 11 in general, moving off of the legacy stack, using FSD Beta code for the highway. As a part of that, extending the maximum trajectory optimization horizon so that it's planning a little bit further ahead, resulting in smoother control on high curvature roads. So I think that's an important point to emphasize as people start to see FSD Beta on the highway now. Hopefully that's recognizable. And then they have added in the visualization something that I think will be apparent to people. They've added text blurbs in the user interface. So if you're approaching, I think we've got one from Dirty Tesla here. You can see like waiting for bicyclist, FSD Beta just being a little bit more communicative in that way about what it is planning. So I think people will notice that. And then as we can see in the screenshot up here, the thumbnail, FSD Beta, now we've got the thicker planning module or visualization there. You've got the chevrons if you're slowing down. We'd seen these sort of on the highway FSD code before, or the highway autopilot code before. So now Tesla's sort of taking that feature. And in general, they're sort of merging them and making this look a lot more polished. You'll also notice that the red outlines for curbs that we've had for pretty much the entirety of FSD Beta, those have been now removed, and in general just looks much more finished. So super exciting to see this. In terms of the initial reactions, it looks like things have been pretty solid so far. It is on my car, bad time for me to be a couple thousand miles away from my car. Hopefully we'll get some experience on that next week, but in general it seems like the reactions have been pretty positive so far. So Dan Berkland here saying that the car controls are noticeably smoother, including braking, throttle, and steering inputs. He talked about what we had talked about with 11.3, some of the offsetting in lanes with semis, says that's working every time. Obviously the visualizations, behavior messages, and then exiting or transitioning off the highway. It's varied a little bit, but sometimes that would happen 1 to 2 miles before the exit. He's saying that's now happening a little bit later, so more human-like. That would probably depend on the context, I'm guessing. We'll probably learn more as people get more experience. And then for some of the downsides, car unnecessarily slow for some cut-ins on the highway. trying to maintain a 2-car following distance even when that car may be in front and the other lane is accelerating. So you could probably go a little bit early, but probably a little bit safer to wait for that to happen, even if a little bit less human-like. And then right to left behavior appears to still be present when making left turns on wide roads. But overall, he said this was the most impressive drive he's ever had on the freeways and highways. And I think that's an important point. I think there was a lot of people, including myself, that expected maybe some regression here as we move to this new version. That's a reasonable expectation to have, but this has taken time. Tesla, I think, has wanted this to be a fairly polished release, and that seems to be what we're getting here so far. I'm sure there will be things again that pop up, but again, pretty positive feedback here. Brandon talking about how the speed-based lane changes are so much better than Navigate on autopilot, finding really good gaps between vehicles. Only critique, the gap between cars, again, far too wide, even in assertive. So kind of the same thing that Dan is saying there. One of the things that seems a little bit different is, you kind of had the 1 through 7, or more recently the 2 through 7 distance setting that you could choose on the highway. It looks like that has been removed, at least temporarily, with the new FSD Beta, now just allowing you to choose between assertive, average, and chill like we've been able to do, and then also a toggle setting for minimizing lane changes. So a little bit different in terms of the control options that we have. One thing to note also is that Tesla has removed the speed offset, not the percentage one, but the sort of fixed speed offset. So if you're doing 5 miles per hour or something like that, that's been removed in favor of just now the speed percent offset. So that is still available. And then one thing to also note on the release notes is that, like we had talked about yesterday, over-the-air recall, this was included in the category settings, but we didn't have the sort of text description yet. Tesla has now addressed all 4 points as a part of that recall. So it looks like we should now start to be able to see FSD Beta. Once this goes a little bit wider to the customer fleet, we should see new vehicles that have just purchased this now should be able to have FSD Beta once this is shipping wide. So good to see that. I posted these on Twitter, so we won't go through every single improvement here, but one thing that we were a little uncertain on was the speed adjustment, 0.3 here. And this is just having to do with more rapidly changing the speed when you're changing speed zones versus having to stick strictly to the posted speed limit. So glad to see that that was what that was about. In terms of some of the other things that we had talked about before, just in terms of the features, so Chuck Cook here, we can see, it's a little bit hard to see with just the playback thing here, but one disengagement that Chuck had, it did pop up on screen asking, what happened with this disengagement, and gave him the opportunity to provide voice feedback. It's just a little short period of time that you have there, so with that being the first time, Chuck didn't quite catch it, but that is nice to see that that is now being included, not just sort of the employee set in terms of that opportunity to give feedback. So like we talked about before, Tesla probably finding ways to automate that and hopefully can make that a really valuable addition to their data collection process. So good to see that making its way into 11.3.1 as well. And then Auto Park, we talked about that appearing in the employee version. That was available for Chuck as well. His vehicle does have ultrasonics, but hopefully that, is a good sign for Auto Park and the progress on some of that lower range stuff. So again, I won't have the opportunity to drive this for probably a week or so, but really looking forward to getting my hands on it. And once I do, I'll definitely share my impressions. But so far, especially with such a sort of step change here, I think good to see that. Elon did say in terms of the more broad rollout, again, major step change improvement, still needs another point release to polish before rolling out wide. So 11.3.2 apparently would be that version. When that happens, we don't have a lot of confidence on. Sometimes those have been really quick, like a week or so. Sometimes obviously they can take a bit longer. So we'll see on that, but definitely exciting progress here for Tesla. All right, next we've got an update from NHTSA. They announced today that they are doing an investigation into Tesla. So great headline, of course. We always get these with recalls or investigations or whatever else. But this is a preliminary evaluation, has to do with 2 defects that were found in Model Ys. Obviously the population for, the 2023 model year as Model Y is estimated up here. So the problem could be more widespread, but the issue here was with a bolt in the steering wheel that was not properly installed. And in some cases, looks like there was one that was reported to the Office of Defect Investigations, I think is what ODI is. And then one reported by Tesla, the manufacturer. So just 2 instances of this. They talk in the notes about how this was both of these vehicles had to go through a reassembly process. So it sounded like they had failed to check and then probably failed to do it in the reassembly process correctly. So hopefully not a super widespread issue, but that's basically what the investigation is looking into. As a reminder, what we've talked about before, the process for the ODI is to do data collection, data review. So they've done that. And then once they get into this investigation stage, that is still very, very early stage, even though investigation doesn't sound good. That's the first time that they're, sending information requests to the manufacturer to try to start to understand the issue and if it's more widespread and what actions need to be taken to make sure that there aren't any safety concerns for the fleet. So it's not an uncommon thing. And NHTSA also says here, basically because they do have dialogue with the manufacturer, they exchange information. The defect investigations ordinarily are resolved prior to a formal finding of a defect by NHTSA, is what they say. So I think we've even maybe looked at percentages of this before, but usually a preliminary evaluation is kind of the extent of where that rises to. They figure out the issues and do a recall like they would in any other circumstance. So just comes with the territory of being an automaker. Nothing too unusual there for Tesla, but obviously, hopefully they get that figured out. All right, last couple of things. We do have more updates on China numbers today. We talked about insured vehicle numbers yesterday, so we had a pretty good idea of this. Wholesale numbers had also been reported before as well. We now have the split between Model 3 and Model Y. Pretty typical split, probably a little bit more Model Y heavy than we have seen in the past, but to be expected since we had reports of Model 3 being shut down there towards the end of the month in February. But 74,400 vehicles for wholesale, which is retail and export, 34,000 retail, 40,500 export. This is basically what we would have expected from the insured vehicle numbers. Saw some conversation that maybe this was a little bit higher than expected. For me, this would have been right in the ballpark, maybe even slightly below based on what the insurance weekly numbers were showing us. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Really the biggest thing we can learn from this that we haven't already talked about is production. Unfortunately, we don't have that data yet. Hopefully I'll get that sometime in the next 24 hours or so, is generally when that happens. And then lastly, we do have an update on Tesla inventory, which has really spiked over the last couple of days. Data from Matt Young here. So we can see total available new inventory for Tesla in the United States jumped from about 800 vehicles a couple days ago, now to about 1,900 vehicles, which is pretty interesting given the price cuts that we just saw on the Model X and S. Most of this inventory does seem to be coming from Model X, as we can see on the chart here, going from 450 vehicles or so listed a couple days ago, now to 1,200. So whether Tesla is taking demo or store inventory out of sort of out of service, putting that now into available for sale, or whether they were just kind of holding back some vehicles. Inventory could include hardware 4 vehicles now. There's a lot of transition that's happening at this moment with the price changes and hardware 4 coming. So we'll see kind of on that, but that's, best guess is that Tesla's just had this inventory, kind of released it. Model S, a little bit less significant, but also a bit of a jump there as well from, 100 to 200. So kind of a good reminder that even though we do keep an eye on these inventory numbers, it's maybe not always the most accurate or precise, rather, gauge of, what Tesla's inventory position is. A couple things also, I guess I don't have it on screen here, but it sounds like the vehicles that did have hardware 4, those are now actually running autopilot. So good to see that update from, don't remember the person's name on Reddit, but they posted an update on that. And Tesla's also posted in their service manual online, now kind of acknowledging hardware 4, talks about 2 forward-facing cameras. There is a dummy sort of positioner dummy camera available there in the forward-facing unit. So service manual just walking through how to manage that for Tesla service employees. All right, that is it for today then. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Thursday, March 9th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.